everyone, welcome back. Today we're discussing access to justice, the restorative option. So although it is commonly thought of as an alternative type of sentencing, restorative justice is actually a philosophical perspective on justice and how that can be obtained by the people who have been particularly impacted by criminal acts. Now, the current criminal justice system here in Canada is almost entirely offender-focused, which means once a victim has initiated that process, the focus is on arresting, prosecuting, and punishing that offender with almost no attention given to the victim's place in it at all. Advocates of restorative justice see it as a way of providing victims and communities with a greater role in this process. And in this way, restorative justice increases access to the justice system for those who are otherwise traditionally excluded. Namely, I'm talking about victims and communities, but also young offenders or those from marginalized groups. The goal of restorative justice is still on holding the offender accountable for the harms, obviously, that they have caused, but it also focuses on accepting responsibility and making reparations, answering questions, and finding peace overall. Now, at least here in Canada, in a relatively short amount of time, restorative justice has been and become a big part of our criminal justice landscape. It's grown to include a variety of programs and opportunities for victims, for offenders, and communities that surround them. But the problem is that access to this restorative justice is still limited. Some of the programs are aimed at only specific demographics or types of offenders, while others are certainly available for people who voluntarily choose to participate. But the problem is that in our country, we tend to move to a more punitive model. And so we need to recognize the importance of seeing what restorative justice can do for us. Now, the following is not certainly exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list, but there are some examples that we're going to discuss together of restorative justice programs that are currently being used here in Canada. So we have examples such as community conferencing, and this is rooted in certain cultures where programs train the offender's families so that they can directly hold the person accountable for accepting responsibility and, of course, making amends. This is a system that is primarily used with our juveniles. Our sentencing circles are another example where the victim and the offender, as well as their support groups, meet with members of the justice system to recommend to a judge what type of sentence might be appropriate. Now, the victim is often given a chance to explain how that crime has impacted them, and many restorative advocates consider it to be a better option than our typical victim impact statements. We also have support circles to be aware of, guys. These are groups of volunteers that help released offenders pursue treatment and mediate concerns with the surrounding community. And this type of program is very common amongst sex offenders. They've normally served their entire sentence, and victim participation is not required or expected, obviously, in these cases. We also see the use of community justice forums. These are run almost exclusively by our RCMP, obviously trained officers acting as facilitators to bring together these victims, supporters, police, the accused, family members, and any other concerned party to try to find an appropriate solution. We also have victim offender mediation. This is one of the longest standing and most effective restoration justice programs here in our country. And this allows for victims and offenders to meet in a safe environment and engage in discussions that are structured and facilitated by a trained mediator. Now, victim participation in these programs is always completely voluntary, but this is, again, one of the most long-standing and effective programs in our history. And finally, we have our youth justice committees. Now, these are trained community members who work with the victim and the young offender, and they negotiate appropriate and reasonable ways for the youth to make amends. Now, the committees work to make sure that the young person has access to adequate support. And these programs are generally only available to non-violent offenders. Now, here's the thing, guys. Restorative justice is a widely misunderstood concept. There is very limited information currently available to the public with, regards to what it is and how it works. But unfortunately, the information that people tend to pass around amongst themselves is often misinformed. And it's important to understand what it is and how it works in our Canadian justice system, if for no other reason than because it's a part of our criminal code. So restorative justice is law, and we can't just ignore it. It's detrimental. So beyond that, there is evidence, and that is what I always reiterate in my classes. There's evidence that the use of this type of justice system can reduce the chances that the offender will commit another crime. Several examples. Research has indicated that repeat offending can actually be reduced in these cases, folks. We're encouraging offenders to take responsibility for their actions, to make reparations for their acts, and overall to learn from the process. Statistics will often refer to juvenile offenders or to those who are still considered, redeemable. However, those who have been impacted by serious crimes have also been shown to benefit from participating in these types of programs. So again, it is designed to help victims and offenders who have been impacted in some way by all levels of crime. And the aim of these programs is to often take the focus off of the offender as an insular entity made up of only the crime they've committed, and put more of an emphasis on healing those harms which are done to the victim and to the surrounding community. Further, these programs, they've been shown to increase over time the satisfaction with regards to how victims feel, how their case is handled, at least due in part to the involvement of victims and the communities in the process. And research does indicate that participating in these types of restorative justice programs can help victims on another level with emotional healing, and even in some cases reduce their fear of being re-victimized in the future. Now, one of the things I'm often asked about is this traditional punitive approach that we often take, and comparing that to our restorative approach that we as a nation are slowly getting to. So, our traditional approach deals with, accountability. And accountability is defined as punishment in this case. So, justice focuses strictly here on establishing guilt. And once that's done, it's directed at the offender. So, usually in these cases, the victim is ignored. And, there is no opportunity at this point offered for the offender, in most cases, to express remorse or to make amends. It is about, guilt and sentencing and punishing that person for a crime that they've committed. As opposed to our more restorative model, which we've discussed in detail, and which helps not only the offender, but has proven in recent research and statistics over the years to show very helpful as well for the victim when they want to participate, of course, as well as family members and possibly community members. Our punitive model sends a message to people, and it's very clear. It says, criminals did this, they deserve to be punished, so let's lock them up and throw away the key, basically. And the fact that prison walls are there, people say they're there to protect us. They're there to protect the rest of us, right? The good, the lawful citizens, the upstanding ones, from them, ultimately. But that doesn't add up in reality. This type of mentality really actually hurts people more than it helps them. And in a system that should teach and deter, we are actually sending the wrong message. Implicit biases also play a role here. They work against certain groups, meaning Black, Latin, Native, LGBTQ, low-income people, for example. These identities are all overrepresented in our punitive system. And when a crime has been committed, we often see disproportionately high sentences, but not for the wealthy white folks. They're often protected, or they get lesser sentences for the same crime. And that's not acceptable, guys. Going to jail does not always rehabilitate people. In fact, it often does the opposite. We know that this type of institution is there for a reason, and there are safety measures in place for people who do need to be put inside these facilities to protect society. That's understandable, but going to jail doesn't always rehabilitate. In fact, there is no proof currently that incarceration prevents crime. So why can't we just simply agree on a system that is more restorative in nature? And that question obviously remains. A quick recap. If we think with the punitive mindset, we are only dealing with the wrongdoer, the focus on what rule was broken and punishing that person, excluding that person by suspending or expulsion or putting them behind bars. With a restorative model, we can include those who are affected by the incident in the response. We can understand how people were harmed and affected by what happened and agree on actions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you with our next video blog.